Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
Let's get right into our first source for today's deep dive.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you've been following the political chess game in Tamil Nadu ahead of the assembly elections, things almost completely unraveled
It
recently.
really did.
We're starting off today in the editorial section, looking at the seat-sharing deal between the ruling DMK and the Congress. They finally sealed it, but there was a moment where the Congress was heavily tempted to just walk away entirely.
Right, they were seriously eyeing an alliance with actor-politician Vijay's brand new party, the Tamilnaga Vetri Kazhagam, or the TVK.
Yeah.
It was this fascinating, albeit very precarious, moment of political brinkmanship. And to really grasp what was at stake here for the state, we have to look past the basic electoral math and actually look at the clashing ideologies.
Because Tamil Nadu is India's second largest economy, right?
Exactly. And it built that immense success on the Dravidian model. That model is a highly specific historical blend of industrialization paired directly with welfare and social justice. The current DMK-led secular progressive alliance has mostly kept that ideological core intact. But the TVK is entirely different. According to the editorial's analysis, it functions far less like a democratic party with a clear policy platform.
And much more like a fan club.
Exactly, a fan club orbiting a massive personality cult.
Which, unfortunately, can have incredibly dark, real-world consequences when it comes to mobilizing crowds.
Yeah.
The editorial brings up the absolute tragedy from September 27, 2025.
Yes.
There was a massive crowd crush at a TVK rally in Karur. 41 people died. And what really stands out from the reporting is that many of the victims were from very poor and marginalized backgrounds. What exactly went wrong there logistically?
The logistical failure was staggering. The organizers had originally planned for about 10,000 people, but the sheer star power brought out over 25,000.
Wow.
And then intentionally, Mr. Vijay's arrival was delayed by nearly 7 hours.
7 hours.
Yes, it was a tactic to let the crowds swell for a better visual, but it left thousands of people trapped, waiting without even basic provisions. And the institutional response afterward was quite revealing.
How so?
Well, instead of stepping up and owning the mismanagement, the TVK apparatus flooded social media with completely unproven claims of political sabotage.
I remember the legal fallout getting incredibly messy after that.
Very messy. The Madras High Court initially set up a special investigation team, but the TVK legally maneuvered to have the Supreme Court transfer the probe to the CBI. By January 2026, Mr. Vijay was making public statements explicitly claiming he was, quote, not responsible for the stampede.
Wow.
It's a stark illustration of the accountability vacuum you sometimes see with personality-driven politics.
So looking at this neutrally, if you are the Congress Party, looking at a fledgling party wrapped in that much tragedy and deflection, why would you even consider ditching a proven alliance for them?
It's the age-old political temptation, arithmetic over ideology. In a crowded election, adding a massive new dedicated fan base to your vote bank looks like a silver bullet. We are actually seeing the DMK alliance wrestle with this exact same temptation on their end.
Right, with Opin or Selvam.
Exactly. They recently inducted him, a politician whose career was heavily intertwined with the BJP, along with the DMDK. The editorial's core argument is that while this might make the spreadsheets look good in the short term, it dilutes the progressive framework that Tamil Nadu voters historically reward.
Yeah.
The piece makes a pointed observation. Prioritizing star power over constitutional values is a high-risk gamble.
It really pulls back the curtain on how fragile these grand alliances actually are behind closed doors. Now, staying in today's editorial section, we're going to pivot from the borders drawn by local politicians to the borders drawn by nature itself.
This is a major shift.
It is. We all know climate change is physically altering the globe, but the legal architecture of the entire world is literally being rewritten to keep up.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the fundamental tension at international climate summits right now is a battle between global survival and state sovereignty.
Okay, break that down.
For a very long time, international law has been anchored by something called PSNR, permanent sovereignty over natural resources. In plain English, that means a country has the absolute right to dig up and sell whatever fossil fuels are under its own dirt.
Makes sense historically.
But if we are going to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius, that sovereign right is a massive liability.
Right, which is why we saw such a massive push for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty at both COP28 and COP30. But let me play devil's advocate here. You can't just walk into a developing nation and demand they leave their most valuable economic asset in the ground without offering them something huge in return.
Precisely. You cannot ask a developing nation to sacrifice its economic future for a crisis largely created by industrialized nations. Any restriction on that sovereignty has to come with immense financial compensation. But the legal crisis goes way beyond just who gets to drill for oil.
It does.
Yes, it is attacking the very definition of what a country actually is. Under the 1933 Montevideo Convention, you need four things to be legally recognized as a state: a government, the ability to negotiate with other states, a permanent population, and a physical territory.
And that last one, the territory, is where this gets terrifying for small island states. If sea level rise puts your entire country underwater, does your nation legally cease to exist?
That is the exact paradox currently breaking the brains of international law scholars. In 2023, the Pacific Islands Forum put out a very defiant declaration stating that international law simply does not have a mechanism for their demise.
Meaning they refuse to just vanish on paper?
Exactly. They refuse to disappear legally just because they might disappear physically. It's an unprecedented gray area. There is no rule saying how much territory you need, but you must have some.
And what about the ocean around them? The economic zones where they fish and mine?
That is currently being fiercely debated under UNCLS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Historically, international law uses an ambulatory baseline. That means as your coastline shrinks, your oceanic borders shrink with it.
So they lose everything.
If that rule stands, yes. But these sinking island states are fighting to declare their existing maritime baselines completely permanent, regardless of where the water level goes. It's a desperate scramble to protect their legal and economic rights.
But the human element of this is what really gets me. If your island sinks, where do you go? And what is your status when you get there?
You would assume you are a refugee, right?
Yeah, a climate refugee.
But legally you aren't. The 1951 Refugee Convention defines a refugee strictly based on a fear of persecution regarding race, religion, or political opinion. It does not cover you if the ocean swallows your home. Frank Bierman, an expert on Earth system governance, has suggested creating a completely new protocol under the UNFCCC just to legally recognize and protect climate refugees.
Because the world's legal code is incredibly outdated for the reality of the climate we now live in.
Absolutely.
It's mind-blowing to think that the very concept of a country is up for debate. Moving from global populations losing their land, let's transition into today's opinion section and look at a massive, silent shift happening within India's own population. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It's a total paradigm shift.
It is. For decades, the dominant anxiety about India was the population bomb. This terrifying idea pushed by Paul and Ann Ehrlich that out-of-control birth rates would just crush the nation.
And that specific anxiety dictated public policy and international aid for half a century. But if you look at the latest National Family Health Survey, NFHS-5, the data prove that narrative is completely dead.
Dead.
Yes, India has quietly, but very rapidly, transitioned into a low-fertility society. Back in the 1990s, the total fertility rate, or TFR, was around 4 children per woman. Today, the vast majority of Indian states are clustering at or below the replacement level of 2.1.
I always assumed that was mostly a trend in the more urbanized southern states. Is this happening everywhere?
That is the big surprise in the data. The sharpest declines across these survey rounds are actually happening in the north and central regions: Uttar Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan, and across the northeastern states.
So what is the engine driving this massive drop?
It is a confluence of social and economic forces. A huge driver is rising education for women and delayed marriage ages. When women enter higher education and the workforce, the opportunity cost of having children early skyrockets.
And raising kids is just incredibly expensive now.
Precisely. Housing, healthcare, and education are hyper-monetized now. But the most fascinating driver is a massive victory in public health.
You mean what the sources refer to as reducing precautionary fertility? That sounds a bit clinical.
It is a clinical term for a deeply human reality. Historically, families had 4 or 5 children as a tragic insurance policy against high infant mortality rates.
Because they didn't know how many would survive.
Exactly. As the state improved vaccination drives and maternal health care, parents finally felt confident that their first or second child would actually survive into adulthood. The need for that heartbreaking precautionary insurance simply vanished.
If you're listening to this and wondering why your rent is skyrocketing in tech hubs like Bangalore or Hyderabad, This demographic shift is a huge piece of that puzzle, isn't it?
Right.
Everyone talks about the demographic dividend, our massive young workforce.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's fundamentally reshaping the internal political economy. We are staring down the barrel of one of the largest internal migrations in history.
How so?
You have this massive pool of young workers in the relatively poorer, higher fertility regions of the north and central states. They have to find jobs, so they will inevitably migrate to the rapidly aging, lower fertility regions in the south and west.
Which changes everything about local infrastructure.
Yes, it creates intense friction over fiscal transfers between states, political representation, and totally changes what infrastructure we need. We don't just need schools anymore, we desperately need to figure out geriatric care and pension systems for an aging India.
It totally flips the script on what the next 20 years look like.
Hmm.
Now, let's bring this macro-level data right down to your literal front door. In today's science section, we are looking at the realities of living in these crowded, shifting cities.
The urban reality.
Right. Think about your daily commute for a second. Think about the traffic, the chaos, and most importantly, the relentless, deafening honking. We brush it off as a headache, but the data shows it is a silent, severe public health epidemic.
We culturally dismiss it as just an annoyance. We assume noise-induced hearing loss is an occupational hazard reserved for factory floor workers. But scientific evidence is now proving that the chronic exposure to everyday urban road traffic is causing clinically measurable, irreversible biological damage.
Just from traffic noise.
It's from traffic. The World Health Organization puts the absolute safe limit at 70 decibels. Average Indian urban traffic routinely hovers between 80 to 100 decibels.
I was reading the research by Dr. Satish K. Lakande in the article, and it is terrifying. He found that this constant barrage of noise creates a permanent dip in your hearing, specifically around the 4 kilohertz frequency. But what really got me is that the damage doesn't just stay in your ears.
No, and that is the truly insidious part. Chronic noise acts as an aggressive trigger for your body's built-in stress alarm system, scientifically known as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Okay.
When you are sitting in a traffic jam surrounded by blaring horns, your body reacts as if it is under physical attack. It pumps out elevated levels of cortisol, spikes your blood pressure, strains your cardiovascular system, and even fragments your deep REM sleep hours later.
So you're just constantly stressed at a biological level.
You are in a perpetual state of fight or flight.
So if it's causing this much measurable harm, why is our regulatory system doing nothing about it? The article mentions that our entire way of measuring noise pollution is fundamentally flawed.
Yes, the regulatory framework relies on snapshot averages, metrics known as LEC or LDN. Basically, they stick a microphone at an intersection, take an average over a set time, and call it a day. But Dr. Markandeya, a key expert in the field, argues we should be measuring cumulative noise exposure.
Which means tracking the whole lifespan.
Exactly, tracking the auditory burden over a person's entire lifetime.
Because it's not a linear scale, right?
It works logarithmically, meaning for every tiny notch you turn up the volume dial, your safe listening time falls off a cliff. At 121 decibels, which a loud air horn easily hits, you might only have 1 hour of safe exposure for your entire life before permanent damage occurs. Snapshot averages completely erase these sudden violent spikes in noise.
And if you want to know what that looks like in practice, the data from Ahmedabad is a massive red flag. In May 2023, they screened 231 traffic police personnel. Over 50% of them had hearing thresholds above 40 decibels. The occupational damage is already here. Are there actual practical solutions being proposed?
The experts have very clear roadmaps. Dr. Amit Kasari is advocating for mandatory routine audiometry screenings every 5 years for high-risk workers like traffic police and delivery drivers, just to catch that specific 4 kilohertz dip early.
And on the city planning side?
Civil engineers like Arga Kamal Guha are pushing for the implementation of low-noise emission zones, essentially geofencing hospitals and schools, restricting the loudest vehicles, and heavily penalizing unnecessary honking.
It definitely makes you think twice before leaning on the horn. Flipping over to today's text and context section, we are trading the noise of the streets for the highly classified, incredibly quiet server rooms of the military. There is a massive, very public clash happening right now between the U.S. Department of Defense and Anthropic, the AI firm that created the Claude chatbot.
What's fascinating here is that we are watching the collision of rapid, desperate military innovation and the ethical guardrails of artificial intelligence play out in public.
Yeah.
The Department of Defense, which under the current Trump administration is officially being styled as the Department of War, is eager to integrate Anthropic's Claude Code product.
And Claude Code is primarily for coding.
Right, right. It is powered by advanced large language models and is specifically designed to write and iterate complex software at lightning speeds.
Which is exactly what the military wants, because trying to hire human programmers who can pass top-secret security clearances to write weapons software is a painfully slow process. AI doesn't need a background check. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth actually issued a memo on January 9th demanding the immediate elimination of all blockers slowing down military AI adoption.
But that mandate crashed directly into Anthropic's corporate architecture. Anthropic operates on what they call a constitution for their AI models. It is hard-coded to prohibit the AI from being used for mass domestic surveillance or for the development of fully autonomous weaponry.
And they wouldn't compromise.
Not at all. Dario Amodei, Anthropic's co-founder, refused to bend. He told the DoD that those ethical red lines were non-negotiable and had to remain in any contract.
I can imagine the DoD did not appreciate being told no.
They certainly did not. They issued an ultimatum, and when Anthropic held firm, the government officially labeled the company a supply chain risk.
A supply chain risk, that's huge.
In the world of defense contracting, that is a bureaucratic death sentence. It's a label normally reserved for foreign companies that might be secretly feeding data to adversaries. It is a very deliberate move to scare any other contractor away from doing business with Anthropic.
Which is wild, because right after Anthropic got blacklisted, OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, swooped in and secured a deal with the DoD. And the crazy part is, looking at the reporting neutrally, OpenAI claims they demanded the exact same red lines regarding surveillance and autonomous weapons. How does one get blacklisted and the other get a contract for the same boundaries?
It comes down to the technical architecture of enforcement. OpenAI successfully argued that their ethical boundaries are inherently more enforceable because their military deployment is structured differently.
How so?
They are providing a cloud-only environment rather than putting the AI directly on edge devices on the battlefield, and they mandate that security-cleared OpenAI personnel remain in the loop. The impartial takeaway here is that the foundational rules of AI warfare are being written right now entirely through these high-stakes contract negotiations.
Staying in the text and context section, we are seeing another profound clash over the rules of the future, but this time it's happening on the streets of Nepal. They are heading into a landmark general election, a full 2 years ahead of schedule, completely driven by the demands of Gen Z.
The human cost that precipitated this early election is deeply sobering. The political establishment was forced to call this vote after 2 days of intense, youth-led protests against entrenched corruption and chronic misgovernance.
And it turned deadly.
Tragically, yes. Those demonstrations resulted in 77 deaths. That immense pressure cracked the system open.
So, purely looking at the numbers, how does the actual election mechanics work for the listener trying to follow the math here?
Voters are electing a new 275-member House of Representatives. 165 of those seats are straightforward, first past the post. Whoever gets the most votes in the district wins. The remaining 110 seats are proportional representation.
And they use a specific formula for that.
Yes. They use something called the Centrology method, which is essentially just a mathematical formula designed to allocate seats more fairly among smaller parties, preventing the massive parties from sweeping everything. To form a government, you need 138 seats.
And from what the sources indicate, getting to 138 is going to be a nightmare because the political landscape is completely fractured between the old guard and these newly formed parties.
Exactly. You have the traditional heavyweights, the Nepali Congress, the CPN-UML, and the Maoists, who have recently rebranded themselves as the Nepali Communist Party. The youth protesters view all of them as architects of the current crisis. To capture that anger, new alternatives have surged.
Like the RSP.
Yes, the Rashtriya Swatantra Party is aiming for the centrist vote.
Right.
There is the pro-monarchy RPP, and fascinatingly, a brand new technocratic group called the Ujjalo Nepal Party, founded by Coleman Gissing. He is a civil servant famous for ending the country's severe power outages.
With 67 parties on the ballot and all accounting done entirely by hand, we are looking at a month before we even know the results. It's going to be a true test of whether protest energy can actually translate into electoral math. Rounding out our text and context section, we're looking at another nation demanding a rewrite of their future. We see so many headlines about the geopolitical turmoil surrounding Iran, but the article asks us to view the current regime through the historical lens of the Shah's oppressive reign before 1979. The parallels are chilling.
This raises an important question. What actually causes an autocracy to collapse? Ryszard Kapuscinski explores this brilliantly in his book, Shah of Shahs.
The history there is so critical.
It is. The Shah possessed unimaginable oil wealth and promised his people he was building a second America. But underneath that PR, he utilized a terrifying secret police force known as the Savak to violently crush any dissent, ban literature, and terrorize the intelligentsia.
And Kapuscinski makes the point that when you systematically destroy a nation's culture and its free thinkers, you create a very dangerous vacuum. The 1979 revolution wasn't necessarily because everyone suddenly loved the religious clerics. It was an anti-Shah revolution. The people were desperate to dismantle the Savak. But the tragedy is that the terror didn't end. The uniforms just changed.
Precisely. If we look at the present day under Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, the mechanisms of control are eerily similar. Instead of the Savak, the regime enforces its will through the Revolutionary Guard and the Guidance Patrol. Arash Azizi's book, What Iranians Want, documents how the state attempts to micromanage every aspect of personal life.
Which eventually hit a breaking point.
We saw the inevitable boiling point of this in 2022 with the tragic death of Mahsa Amini over a headscarf, which ignited the massive women life freedom movement.
For the women risking their lives on the streets today, the Guidance Patrol is functionally no different than the Savak. And the courage of the journalists documenting this is astounding. Fatima Jamalpour and Nilo Tabrizi faced severe interrogation and imprisonment just to write for The Sun after long nights, ensuring the stories of these women weren't erased. We see all this external chaos right now, the bombings by Israel and the U.S., the assassination of Khamenei, the reports of over 780 people killed.
But the crucial historical synthesis of all these sources is that genuine, durable political change is never engineered from the outside.
Right.
Foreign interventions or bombings don't create democracy. Just as in 1979, the cycle of revolution will only truly break when ordinary Iranians on the streets are able to claim their own political destiny. The struggle is profoundly internal.
That is a very grounding perspective amidst all the breaking news. Finally, stepping into today's foreign section, we are going to look at what might be the most profoundly sensitive ethical debate happening in the world right now. So what does this all mean? Canada is currently agonizing over the legal and moral boundaries of assisted dying, specifically whether the law should be expanded to include individuals whose sole underlying condition is severe mental illness.
It is a subject that demands immense empathy and highly nuanced reporting. To understand where Canada is now, we need the timeline. In 2016, Canada legalized assisted dying specifically for individuals at the immediate end of their lives.
Okay.
In 2021, they expanded that to include people with serious, incurable illnesses, even if their death wasn't immediately foreseeable. The system is heavily utilized. In 2023, roughly 1 in 20 Canadians who died chose this route.
And when you read the case studies of people utilizing it for physical illness, you see profound stories of people reclaiming agency. You read about Jacques Poisson, a 93-year-old man suffering from advanced prostate cancer, and his wife Jose, who were able to pass away peacefully, surrounded by their families singing to them. Or Rachel Fournier, dealing with aggressive brain cancer, who finds immense psychological comfort just knowing she controls the final moment when her body fails her.
Those cases highlight the alleviation of terminal physical decline. But the current crisis revolves around an expansion that was slated for 2024, but has now been delayed until 2027 to ensure the medical system is adequately prepared.
And this expansion focuses entirely on psychiatric conditions.
Yes. The debate is centered on patients like Claire Brosseau. She is 49 years old and suffers from exceptionally severe bipolar disorder. She is not physically dying, but she has spent decades exhausting every single available psychiatric intervention: institutionalization, intense pharmacology, cognitive behavioral therapy. She reports experiencing perhaps 10 to 30 minutes of relief in a given day. She is asking for a peaceful legal exit.
And this specific scenario has completely fractured the psychiatric community, hasn't it?
Deeply. You have prominent voices like Professor Trudeau Lemons, who strongly warns against this expansion. He argues that offering assisted dying for mental illness risks fundamentally trivializing suicide, almost presenting it as a legitimate therapeutic option.
He points to European data too, right?
He does. He points to data from Belgium and the Netherlands showing spikes in these procedures and emphasizes that, unlike terminal cancer, the trajectory of psychiatric disorders is notoriously difficult to predict with absolute certainty.
But then you have experts advising the government who look at it from a completely different angle.
Yes, Dr. Mona Gupta, a psychiatrist who chaired the government's expert advisory panel, argues the exact opposite. Her position is that there is no valid clinical justification for treating physical agony and mental agony differently.
That the suffering is equal.
For a tiny fraction of patients who have endured treatment-resistant, severe mental disorders for decades, the psychological suffering is just as unrelenting and just as unrelievable as late-stage physical disease.
It strips away all the hypotheticals and forces you to really look at how we validate different kinds of pain.
It truly does. And as we conclude our analysis of these sources, I think this leaves us with a profound question to reflect on. In our pursuit of a compassionate society, how do we accurately measure and validate invisible psychological agony compared to physical pain, especially when the finality of the treatment we are offering is absolute?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.